Welcome to the Cyber Philosophy channel. Today we are going to talk about an epistemological turn that can break through the blind spots of traditional epistemology and the oppositions it has created.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm really excited to dig into this with you.
Yeah, me too. I mean, think about the last time and I'm talking to you listening right now, think about the last time you read a fiercely debated topic online, like a really heated political argument.
Well, we all know how that goes.
Right. Did you actually change the other person's mind, or did you both just, dig your heels in and reinforce the walls of your own echo chambers?
It's almost always the latter.
Exactly. And today, we are doing a deep dive into the source material of a fascinating paper that argues the problem isn't just human stubbornness or, social media algorithms. The problem is actually much deeper.
It is entirely deeper. And when we sat down to write this paper, a preliminary study on decentralized epistemology, that exact frustration is what drove us. We wanted to figure out why, in an era where we have absolute mountains of data and artificial intelligence processing it faster than we can blink.
Yeah, literally instantly.
Right. We're still plagued by such profound alienation. I mean, we are watching ecological crises unfold. We are lost in these endless ideological wars. And having more, quote, facts doesn't seem to be fixing anything at all.
Which is the core mission of our deep dive today. And I am thrilled to have you here because you are actually one of the co-authors of this framework.
I am, yeah. Our team has been working on this for quite a while.
So you're taking us right to the bleeding edge of how humans process reality. So when you say the problem is deeper than algorithms, you're actually pointing the finger at traditional epistemology itself.
Yes.
What is fundamentally broken about how we've been taught to process facts?
Well, what's broken is that our traditional systems of knowledge are highly centralized, and they're dualistic. They force us into these really rigid opposition.
Like an either-or kind of thing.
Exactly. Let's look at history for a second. On one hand, you have Aristotle, who placed the center of knowledge squarely on the object, like the thing out there in the world being observed.
Okay, so the truth is in the object.
Right. It assumes the truth is just sitting inside the object, waiting for a clever human to extract it. But then, on the other hand, you have Kant's Copernican revolution, which shifted the center to the subject.
The human mind doing the observing.
Precisely. Kant argued our minds actively structure reality.
But, I mean, regardless of whether you pick Aristotle or Kant, you're still forced to choose a side.
You are.
It creates this binary where it's mind versus matter, subject versus object, and ultimately right versus wrong.
Exactly. And we realize that this centralization, this intense focus on finding a single, fixed point of absolute truth is actually what breeds human arrogance.
Wow, arrogance. How so?
Well, think about it. If I believe I have extracted the absolute objective truth from an object, I can use that knowledge for extraction, for power. I can use it to dominate anyone who holds a different view.
Because I have the facts and you don't.
Right. The framework itself manufactures conflict.
So to you listening right now, consider this. What if the way you process a simple fact is built on a faulty operating system? Today, we're going to dismantle those old centers.
That's the goal.
We're going to explore what happens when you remove that omnipotent observer, and we'll be looking at 4 characteristics and 6 features of a new, fluid way of understanding the world.
It's a completely different way of navigating reality.
But before we get into the heavy mechanics of those characteristics, I really want to start with the poetic metaphor your team used to open the paper. You reference Nietzsche's Sun and Moon.
We do, yeah. When we were developing this, we actually wrote a poem called Song of the Sun and Moon. It draws heavily on Nietzsche's Thus Spoke Zarathustra.
Okay, so what does the moon represent here?
We use the moon to represent that traditional, cold, objective knowledge. Think about the moon. It looks flawless on the surface, right?
Okay.
And it claims to be an impartial reflector of light. But Nietzsche described it as secretly greedy. It's like 1,000 greedy eyes or cold mirrors. It just passively hoards facts without actually engaging in the messy, vibrant reality of life.
Oh, that's such a good image. It's the ultimate detached observer, like doom scrolling through a Wikipedia page. You're collecting data, but you aren't actually participating in the world.
Precisely. You're just a mirror. The sun, on the other hand, is the epistemological turn we are proposing.
Okay, the sun generates heat.
Exactly. The sun doesn't just reflect borrowed light, it generates its own heat. It actively crashes into the world, interacting with it to create new growth.
So it's active, not passive.
Yes. We want to move from moonlight hoarding to sunlight creation, a dynamic knowledge that bears the actual weight of shared existence.
Okay, here is where I have to admit some confusion, though.
Sure.
Because to build this sun-like epistemology, you didn't just write poetry. Your paper combines two massive and, frankly, very different theoretical frameworks.
We did, yes.
You took Hans-Georg Gadamer's philosophical hermeneutics, and you paired it with Niklas Luhmann's systems theory.
That's right.
But Gadamer is all about poetry, literature, human history. And Luhmann, I mean, he treats humans almost like biological processing units or computer networks.
Yeah.
Those seem completely mutually exclusive. How do you actually bridge that massive gap?
I completely understand why that sounds contradictory at first.
Yeah.
Let's break down the mechanisms of each, just briefly.
Leave.
From Gadamer, we focused on the concept of prejudices. Now, he doesn't mean bigotry.
Right, not like racial prejudice.
No, he means our prejudgments, our historical and cultural context. Traditional science tells you to strip away your biases to become a blank slate, right?
Yeah, to be objective.
Gadamer argues that is biologically and psychologically impossible. Your prejudices are your operating system. You literally cannot process data without them.
Because you have to stand somewhere to see anything.
Exactly. You use those prejudices to achieve a fusion of horizons with a text or another person.
Mm-hmm. Right, so you bring your horizon, the book brings its horizon, and they overlap. And Luhmann, what does he bring to this?
Luhmann's systems theory looks at how systems, whether it's a single human cell, a mind, or an entire society, process incredibly complex environments.
Okay.
Systems are closed in their internal operations, but open to their environment. Because the world is too chaotic to process all at once, a system uses meaning to filter out the noise.
Like a firewall filtering traffic?
Sort of, yeah. It finds temporary stability through what Luhmann calls structural coupling, momentary alignments with the environment.
Okay, so Gadamer is the software of human interpretation, and Luhmann is the hardware processing the data. I like that, but I'm still not seeing the overlap between the two.
The overlap is decentralization. That is the bridge.
Right.
Both of these thinkers completely destroy the idea of a central, purely objective human observer standing outside the universe looking in.
Oh, I see.
Gadamer removes the arrogant subject by saying you are always trapped inside your historical horizon. Luhmann removes the arrogant subject by saying you are just a complex system filtering meaning.
You're no more central to the universe than a plant or an algorithm.
Exactly. We realize that if you weave them together, you get a fully decentralized way of knowing.
Okay, if the arrogant observer is completely gone, the entire foundation of how we define a fact has to change.
It changes everything.
Let's get into the mechanics of this. You outlined 4 characteristics of decentralized epistemology. Let's take the first one, the decentralization of the subject.
Right. So in traditional philosophy, the I, the human subject, is the omnipotent king of the cognitive castle. We dictate reality.
The center of the universe.
Yeah. But decentralizing the subject means accepting that you, me, the listener,
Yeah.
we're not the center.
What are we then?
We are merely psychological systems, interpreting an environment based on our specific structural boundaries. We are participants in a network, not the masters of it.
Okay, but if the observer isn't calling the shots anymore, what happens to the thing we are actually looking at? The object itself must change too.
It does, profoundly. And that is characteristic too, the decentralization of the object.
Meaning?
Meaning doesn't just sit inside a book or a data set like a treasure chest waiting to be unlocked. We lean heavily on Luhmann's concept of double contingency to explain this mechanism.
Double contingency. Walk us through how that actually works in practice.
Okay, imagine you are walking down a narrow hallway.
Right.
And someone is walking right toward you. Neither of you knows what the other will do. You step to your left, they step to their right, and you block each other.
Oh, the awkward hallway dance. I hate that.
Exactly. Then you both tentatively adjust. Now, the meaning of who goes which way didn't exist in your head, and it didn't exist in their head before that moment.
It wasn't pre-planned.
Right. It was generated only in the active, unpredictable interaction between the two of you.
That is a great visual. So the hallway dance is the generation of meaning.
Exactly. We argue that cognition works the exact same way between a person and an object. Meaning is a live negotiation. The object's meaning literally changes as your system interacts with it.
Wow. Okay, because meaning is generated strictly in that hallway interaction, you can no longer rely on cold, static logic to process it. The facts themselves become fluid.
Yes.
What does that mean for knowledge as a whole?
That leads to characteristic 3, The decentralization of knowledge. Because the subject and object are decentered, knowledge cannot be a permanent, absolute truth that you lock in a vault.
It's not the moon.
Exactly. It's not the moon hoarding facts. Knowledge is merely a temporary resonance, a passing event.
A passing event.
It is that brief moment in the hallway where you and the other person figure out how to pass each other. Once you walk past, the environment changes, and that specific knowledge is gone. It shifts.
But if knowledge is just a passing event, a temporary resonance, we need a completely different cognitive toolkit to capture it.
We do.
Which brings us to characteristic 4, and this is where I think things get highly controversial.
Let's hear it.
The decentralization of rationality. You're completely redefining cognition here.
We are. Traditional epistemology puts pure rationality on a throne, but pure logic is a closed loop. In our framework, we redefine cognition as a trinity: reason, emotion, and will.
Okay, break those down.
Reason acts to maintain the structural consistency of your thoughts. Emotion, or sensibility, is your openness to external stimuli. It's the sensor that feels the friction of a new idea.
And will.
Will is the active conscious choice to suspend your own prejudices so you can truly hear the other side.
Hold on, I have to push back hard on this.
Go for it.
If we decentralize rationality and elevate emotion to the same level as reason, aren't we inviting total chaos?
I see why you'd think that.
I mean, this sounds like you're saying we should just rely on, vibes to figure out what is true. Isn't this just a recipe for the post-truth era we are desperately trying to escape?
It's a very fair point, and when we were developing this framework, we struggled with that exact concern. How do we prevent this from collapsing into pure relativism? But here is why it doesn't. Pure logic, on its own, only reinforces what you already know.
How so?
If you only use logic, you are just running complex algorithms on your existing prejudices. You build an incredibly logical, heavily fortified echo chamber.
So logic builds the walls, but it can't open a door.
Exactly. To achieve a genuine fusion of horizons with something entirely new, you require emotion to feel that the walls are limiting you.
You have to feel the friction.
Yes, and you require will. Will is the administrator granting override permissions to the system.
Ooh, I like that.
It takes will to say, my logic is flawless based on my data, but my data might be incomplete. Without emotion and will, reason cannot learn anything truly new.
Okay, that mechanism makes a lot of sense. Will is the override switch. So if knowledge is this fluid, interactive resonance, and we process it using reason, emotion, and will,
Yes.
then the actual facts we walk away with must look entirely different than what we were taught in school. And your paper details 6 features of this new knowledge.
We do, yes. The 6 features outline what this looks like in practice.
Let's walk through these. What's the first feature?
The first is partiality. Because your knowledge is completely dependent on your unique, situated prejudices and your temporary environment, it's impossible to see the full, objective picture.
So nobody has the whole truth.
Right. You are like one of the blind men touching the elephant. Your knowledge is always partial.
Which is humbling and, frankly, a relief. You don't have to know everything.
Exactly.
And the second feature?
Dynamism. Because you are constantly moving through time and your environment is constantly changing, the meaning generated in those interactions constantly shifts.
The river you step into is never the same river twice.
You got it.
And if it's always shifting, I assume that explains feature number 3, endlessness.
Yes. The process of interpretation is infinite. Think of it like fractal geometry. The closer you zoom in on an object or a text, the more complex its boundaries become.
So you're never done.
There is always a new horizon to explore. You are never, ever done learning about a subject.
Okay, feature number 4 is where we get into behavior, right? Practicality.
Yes. For this, our team integrated the great Chinese philosopher Wang Yangming's concept that knowing and doing are one.
Knowing and doing are one.
Right. In a decentralized framework, you cannot separate acquiring a fact from its application. If you claim to know a stove is hot, but you put your hand on it anyway.
Wang Yangming would say you didn't actually know it was hot.
Exactly. You didn't possess the knowledge. Knowledge is an ethical, lived experience. It demands action.
Okay, number 5. This one seems perhaps the most challenging for our modern internet culture. Affirmativeness.
This is absolutely crucial for how we handle conflict. Affirmativeness means that when you encounter an opposing viewpoint, you must actively, intentionally assume it holds a complete, valid truth.
Wait, assume they are right. From the jump.
Yes. If you approach a text just to debunk it, your defenses are up, your system is closed, and you block any resonance. You must affirm it first, letting it inside your system before you can truly engage with it.
It's like internally steel-manning the argument before you are even allowed to process it. That is hard to do.
It takes an incredible amount of will, like we discussed earlier.
Yeah, the override switch.
Yeah.
And the final feature, number 6, equality.
Equality refers to the universal significance of all things. Because meaning is generated in interaction, a massive encyclopedia and a single falling leaf both hold a complete philosophical universe.
They both trigger the hallway dance.
Exactly. They're entirely equal in their potential to trigger a profound fusion of horizons.
Let me offer an analogy to see if I am grasping the scope of this.
Please.
Traditional knowledge is like downloading a static PDF file from a server. It's fixed, it tries to be perfectly objective, and you just file it away on your hard drive.
That's the moon.
Right. But your 6 features make knowledge sound more like a multiplayer open-world video game.
Oh, interesting.
The environment isn't static. It only renders and changes because your avatar is actively interacting with it. It's moving, it requires your participation, and the map never truly ends.
That is a brilliant way to put it. The world only renders as meaning when you collide with it. It is a live performance, not a static file.
But this brings up the ultimate question for you listening right now.
Okay.
This all sounds philosophically beautiful, but how do you actually use this? We live in a world of board meetings, stressful relationships, and very real conflicts.
Video.
How does a listener apply this video game rendering to their Tuesday afternoon?
That is where we introduce the practical methodology of the paper. We call it reverse philosophical engineering.
Reverse philosophical engineering.
Think about how a software engineer deconstructs a program to see the hidden source code. We can do the exact same thing with texts, debates, or societal issues.
Break down the steps of that reverse engineering for us.
Sure. First, you build a temporary engineering structure. This is a hypothesis based on your current prejudices.
Okay.
Second, you engage the opposing view using that principle of affirmativeness. You assume, just for the sake of the exercise, that their view is completely true.
The steel manning.
Exactly. Third, you dialogue with it until you reach that fusion of horizons, that momentary hallway dance. But here's the crucial step. You don't stop there.
That's that.
You then reverse back. Right. You examine the temporary structure you built, you analyze the blind spots you just uncovered in your own thinking, and then you discard the temporary structure entirely.
Wait, you discard the structure entirely? You just throw away the framework you use to understand the fact?
Yes, because the goal of human existence isn't to hoard data like the cold moon. The goal is to upgrade your own operating system.
Wow.
This practice shifts the entire human experience from mere learning, which is just accumulating facts, to what we call awakening. And this leads to our ultimate proposition, the holozon.
Holozon. What exactly makes up this holozon or holistic philosophy?
We argue that every single thing you encounter contains a holozon made of 3 interconnected parts. First is noeticity.
Noeticity.
Which is the epistemology, the medium or lens of knowing. Second is praxicality.
The practical part.
Right, the ethics, the practical action it demands of your hands in the real world. And third is ontocality.
Ontocality.
The metaphysics, the ultimate reality or ground it points toward. When you discard the temporary structures and engage with the world this way, you aren't just memorizing facts.
You're doing something much bigger.
You are interacting with the holistic philosophy of the universe, moment by moment.
If we translate this directly to your daily life as a listener, imagine you are reading a deeply controversial article, something that genuinely makes your blood boil.
We've all been there.
Using this framework, do not read it to find the flaws. Treat it as a system, step inside it, apply affirmativeness. Let your horizon fuse with it to understand the mechanics of why it exists.
Exactly.
And then reverse engineer it. Step back out. By doing that, you learn just as much about the boundaries of your own mind as you do about the article itself.
That is exactly the application. It takes immense courage to let go of the center, to let go of the moon with its flawless reflection, and embrace the heat, the interaction, and the messiness of the sun.
Yeah, it's not easy.
It's really not. But we firmly believe it is the only epistemological turn that can break through the endless oppositions dividing us.
We have covered incredible ground today. We've taken the heavy central pillars of traditional knowledge, the arrogance of the omnipotent observer, the static nature of the hidden object, and we've watched them dissolve.
They really do dissolve when you look closely.
We replace them with a decentralized, fluid, and fiercely practical way of engaging with reality. We've moved from the illusion of absolute truth to the dynamic rendering of endless interpretation.
And our profound hope is that by detailing these 4 characteristics and 6 features, we've offered a genuinely practical toolkit for navigating the chaos, rather than just adding more abstract theory to the pile.
I think you definitely have. I want to leave you with a final thought to mull over, something that builds on this idea of decentralized meaning.
I'd love to hear it.
If knowledge and meaning only exist in the active interaction between an observer and an object, that momentary dance in the hallway, consider what happens to the knowledge we leave behind. Does the truth of a magnificent book simply vanish if it sits on a shelf, and there is no human left to read it, to bring their prejudices, and to create that fusion of horizons?
That's a profound question.
If there is no interaction, is there no meaning? Thank you for listening. We hope this article has been helpful and inspiring to you. See you next time.